preliminary findings, and this is significant. Focal area of red discoloration in the soft tissue of the back of the head, the occipital region. He said the etiology is unknown at this time. He said the body was received after the initial autopsy. He said the body had marked decompensation. He said corona incision of the scalp, brain removal, Y-shaped incision of the anterior torso, and he talked about the organs being removed, as is common, accompanied in the body cavity. And that when you have an autopsy, the organs are removed from the body and they are dissected and examined, and then they are put back in a bag within inside the body. So when they're buried, their remains will all be with them. But in this occasion, if there's going to be a second autopsy, then the organs are put in the body cavity so the second pathologist could be able to examine the organs as well. Very significant for Dr. Mitchell was that the anterior inner neck structures were absent, not received with the body, and we'll explain that in just a minute. And then it talks about the additional procedures performed during the second autopsy, and we'll go into the paragraphs on that there because he explains it better in his narrative. So where's the first page of the discussion? Not the diagram yet. You can keep the diagram over there. Move this back, Lisa. So he talks in the preliminary discussion opinion. This forensic pathologist identified several limitations during the second autopsy that create barriers to establishing a definitive cause and manner of death for Nolan Xavier Wells. And that's important. He talks about the fact that we didn't get to see the body when it was first recovered, like the medical examiner working for Mississippi would have seen it. He talked about the second autopsy performed on Nolan Wells revealed marked decompensation or changes. Marked decompensation can obscure the presence and absence of bruising on the skin surface, especially during a second autopsy examination. What he's saying, because the body was so decomposed that you couldn't tell if there was bruises or abrasions on the body when he received it on the 10th of July. For these reasons, additional dissection procedures not performed during the first autopsy examination were performed to rule out potential blunt force injuries responsible for the death. These procedures included facial dissection, posterior head and neck dissection, dissection of the ribs, the pelvic, dissection of the subcutaneous and deep soft tissue, dissection of the back, the buttocks, the arms and legs. He did all of this to rule out things. He ruled out there were no fractures or deep tissue injuries identified. This was very important because he wanted to be very thorough and very transparent, because transparency is the key to getting to the answers of why Nolan Wells is not with us. So he did that there and was very straightforward, very open, very open. He says, however, dissection of the back of the head during the layered posterior neck dissection revealed a 12 by 8 inch focal area of red discoloration in the deep soft tissues overlaying the occipital bone. And he talked about how he found red discoloration when he cut open into the back of his head towards the occipital bone, and he saw the red discoloration, and we actually saw the pictures of it. It's significant. You can't help but notice, why is this dark red here in the back of his head? And so he was important to note that in his report. He said that etiology of this finding is unclear. There are no lacerations of the overlaying skin nor fractures of the underlying skull. These findings are inconclusive for perimortem injury due to both the extensive decomposition and the absence of associated injuries. This finding, however, is significant enough to be highlighted in this preliminary report for further investigation. It is important to reiterate that the finding could not have been observed in the first autopsy because the posterior head and neck dissection were not performed. He said another limitation, move this back here. Another limitation faced by this forensic pathologist was the absence of the anterior internal neck structures. The trachea and the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone were not received with the body. So he's saying that the throat was not received with the body when he got Nolan Wells' body in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. And so let's discuss that with what he said about that. He said, it is assumed that the initial pathologist retained these structures for additional evaluation. He said the retention of the anterior neck structures during an initial autopsy is a common forensic pathology practice. He was chief medical examiner for 7 years in Washington, D.C., and he said that if they had concern about throat or any fracture or compression of the throat, they too would hold them back. He doesn't know why they held the throat back, but he said the throat was not with the body of Nolan Wells when he received it in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. He said, nevertheless, a posterior neck dissection performed without review of the anterior neck structures is incomplete. Therefore, this pathologist cannot rule out injury to the neck as a contributor or a cause of death. He said he would need to have the medical examiner in Mississippi allow him to review the throat. That's why he said his autopsy is undetermined pending investigation. Remember, it's about transparency.
If you want to follow cases where the truth refuses to stay buried, you are in the right place. Like this video and subscribe to Samuel Vale Crime Chronicles, because this case is far from over, and every update matters. Nolan Xavier Wells was a young man from Mississippi. He was known to his family, his friends, and his community as someone full of life, present, connected, and capable. Among the things people closest to him knew was something that would later become a central pillar of forensic scrutiny: Nolan could swim. That fact wasn't incidental. In the world of death investigation, it is the kind of detail that changes the entire framework of how a death near water must be examined. On or around July 4, 2026, Nolan Xavier Wells was found dead in or near a body of water in Mississippi. A member of the United Cajun Navy, one of the civilian search and recovery volunteers involved in the discovery, reported that when Nolan's body was located, he was face down and fully clothed. Those two observations, face down, fully clothed, a known swimmer, immediately raised questions that the official investigation would need to answer with precision and transparency. They did not. The Mississippi Medical Examiner's Office conducted the initial autopsy. Standard forensic procedures were followed: a coronal incision of the scalp, brain removal, a Y-shaped incision of the anterior torso, and the removal, dissection, and examination of internal organs. This is routine in autopsy practice. What is also routine, when organs are placed back into the body cavity following examination, is that a second forensic pathologist retained to conduct an independent review can access and evaluate those same organs. The system, in theory, is designed to support the pursuit of truth. But what happened next was anything but routine. When Nolan's body was later transported to Washington, D.C., for an independent second autopsy, the forensic pathologist who received it made a discovery that would define the entire investigation going forward. The anterior internal neck structures, the trachea, the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone, were not with the body. They had been removed during the first autopsy and retained by the initial pathologist. They were never returned. They were never sent along. When the second pathologist opened that case, Nolan Wells arrived without his throat. The forensic pathologist engaged by the Wells family to conduct the second examination was Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, Jr., a former chief medical examiner of Washington, D.C., with 7 years of experience leading one of the country's most prominent medical examiner offices. Dr. Mitchell understood immediately what the absence of those structures meant for his examination. Without the trachea, the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone, a complete posterior neck dissection was impossible. And without a complete posterior neck dissection, any injury to the neck, including compression or manual force, could not be confirmed or ruled out. In plain terms, the one set of structures most critical to determining whether something had been done to Nolan's throat was simply not there. Dr. Mitchell noted in his report that the retention of anterior neck structures during an initial autopsy is a recognized forensic pathology practice, typically employed when there is concern about possible injury to the throat. He stated clearly that he does not know why the Mississippi Medical Examiner retained those structures, but he documented the consequence with equal clarity. His examination was incomplete without them, and he could not rule out injury to the neck as a contributing factor or cause of death. That was only the beginning of what he found. The body of Nolan Xavier Wells arrived in an advanced state of decomposition, what forensic professionals refer to as marked decompensation. This level of decomposition creates significant limitations during a second autopsy. Surface-level findings like bruising or abrasions become impossible to observe with reliability. Soft tissue changes complicate the interpretation of injuries. The further a body travels down the path of decomposition, the narrower the window becomes for definitive forensic conclusions. Because of this, Dr. Mitchell made a decision that speaks directly to his commitment to thoroughness. He performed a series of additional dissection procedures that had not been conducted during the first autopsy. Procedures designed to systematically rule out blunt force injuries that decomposition might otherwise obscure. He dissected the face, the ribs, the pelvis, the subcutaneous and deep soft tissues of the back, the buttocks, both arms, and both legs. He examined everything he could access. He found no fractures. He found no deep tissue injuries in those regions. But then he reached the back of the head. During a layered posterior head and neck dissection, a procedure that was never performed during the first autopsy, Dr. Mitchell discovered something that stopped the examination in its tracks. In the deep soft tissues overlying the occipital bone, at the back of the skull, he identified a focal area of red discoloration measuring 12 centimeters by 8 centimeters. Photographs were taken. The finding was visually striking. The discoloration was significant in both size and depth, located not at the surface, but deep in the tissue, beneath the skin and over the bone at the back of Nolan's head. Dr. Mitchell was precise in how he characterized this finding. There were no lacerations of the overlying skin. There were no fractures of the underlying skull. Because of the extensive decomposition, the finding is classified as inconclusive for perimortem injury. But Dr. Mitchell made one point absolutely clear. This finding was significant enough to be documented, flagged, and formally highlighted in his preliminary report for further investigation. He stated with equal directness that this finding could not have been observed during the first autopsy because the posterior head and neck dissection was never performed. No one looked there the first time. Beyond the structural findings, Dr. Mitchell also identified critical pieces of information that were entirely beyond his reach. He could not directly observe the airway or the lungs for the presence of water because those organs had already been dissected during the first autopsy. He could not evaluate the stomach contents, which would have provided information about Nolan's last meal, the timeline of his death, and how long he had been in the water. The toxicology results from the initial examination had not been shared with him at the time of his report, and he had no access to photographs or documented observations from the scene or from the first autopsy that were taken closer in time to July 4, 2026. With all of these limitations documented and all of these gaps acknowledged, Dr. Roger A. Mitchell Jr. arrived at his conclusion. The cause of death, undetermined. The manner of death, undetermined, pending investigation. And in language that carries enormous weight, he stated that based on his examination, he cannot rule out whether any intervening non-accidental factors contributed to or caused the death of Nolan Xavier Wells. He cannot rule out foul play. 7 questions remain formally outstanding in his report. What circumstances led to Nolan entering the water? What was the body's exact position at discovery? Was there water present in the airway? Are there injuries to the retained neck structures? Is there evidence of intracranial hemorrhaging? What did the stomach contents reveal? And what did the toxicology results show? Every single one of those questions remains unanswered. The Wells family, led by Christine and Elmore, has not stopped. They are demanding that the Mississippi Medical Examiner share all photographs, observations, and retained structures with Dr. Mitchell. They are calling for the district attorney to present Dr. Mitchell's findings before a grand jury. They are demanding that every piece of relevant evidence be placed before the people whose responsibility it is to decide whether justice will be pursued. A young man who could swim was found face down in a Mississippi waterway, fully clothed, on July 4, 2026. The back of his head was never examined during the first autopsy. His throat was removed and never returned. The independent pathologist says foul play cannot be ruled out, and the family is still waiting for answers. The truth about what happened to Nolan Xavier Wells has not yet been told, but it is being demanded, and it will not be buried. Subscribe to Samuel Vale Crime Chronicles and make sure you have notifications turned on, because as this investigation develops, every new finding will be covered here. If this case deserves answers, and it does, then it deserves witnesses. Be one. Like this video and stay with us.